dear listeners.
Mm.
Welcome back. So, today we are talking about societal expectations,
Mm.
fitting in or not. What are your views on that?
Yeah, I think I grew up in Australia, and there is definitely the road most traveled, particularly when it comes to home ownership and settling down and how that looks. And it's not necessarily about high school, college, university, and then career, family, house, and things like that. Not as structured as what I would say the US can be. My times living over there, but there is definitely an emphasis around home ownership. It's a part of the steps that one would
It's
take.
like the ultimate goal, so to
Yes,
say.
it is the ultimate goal, and it is almost the ultimate symbol
Mm.
of, oh, this person's settled.
You've made it.
They've made it. They're making good choices. They're good now. They've settled down. Things like this. Because I would often get asked within the extension of the family unit, well, when are you going to settle down? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? And it was quite interesting because I almost couldn't get my head around it, where I would say, you have chosen to walk your path, and I'm choosing to walk mine. They are very different, but I can have respect for you and the choices you make. Why can't you respect the choices I make? And I worked out that when you travel, it naturally opens up your mind and your heart. And so, as you know, when you're a traveler, you see so many beautiful, weird, and wonderful things. And what a traveler experiences, even in a week, and the decisions you have to make, and how those choices could potentially really impact the outcome of your experience is quite significant. It's not like when you live back in the suburbs and you choose whether to shop at Woolworths or shop at Coles. It's not. There is much more depth, and that's what's so exciting about it. So I realized that it's about a capacity thing. This person is, or people are ignorant because they're unaware of what it actually takes to live the life of a traveler. And we're talking like I would leave Australia for 1 to 2 years at a time and do an extensive amount of traveling within that time frame. And so, anyway, it was always in the back of my mind, culturally, things like this. And so, when I returned from my last big adventure overseas, and I set myself up. As I said, I within a year, I had my own barbershop, and I was operating this. And because it was in a beautiful coastal town, there was and it's a holiday town for a lot of people from Melbourne, that there was a lot of affluence. So over the years that I had the barbershop, I was very fortunate to have amazing clients from all walks of life and very successful professionals. And I was very influenced by their stories and how they had set themselves up financially and things like that. And so when I turned 30, I celebrated my 30th birthday by flying to South Africa and doing one of the world's second biggest bungee jump in the world. I did that because for me, that was the way I wanted to cap off my 20s, and it was quite symbolic. And and it was the start of a new adventure, which, as I said, went for 2 years. But only 6 days after that 30th birthday, there was an incredible amount of introspection that really began. Like, what am I doing? Who am I? What's happening? And it's very prevalent, that transition from 20s to 30s, because no longer are you able to say, I'm 20 something. And so, anyway, by the time I opened up my shop and I was hearing these stories, I was really trying to envision myself as a more settled version. I had the business now, I had a dog, which was amazing, and everything was, all the ducks were kind of in a row. But over the time, I realized that that wasn't going to be the place where I was going to settle, quote unquote. Even though I loved it, I just knew that I didn't resonate with the cold weather and things like that. And so, anyway, when I sold my business and then moved to the Kimberley and was living in a remote Aboriginal community, I then saved a bunch of money and I was like, okay, now's the next step. I really want to get a house. And so I'd wake up early in the morning and, brew a pot of coffee and sit on the couch and just read all these books on real estate, on finance, on all of these modalities around how to invest and things like that. And so because I was pretty uneducated in that field, and the guys who I said I was cutting their hair were very, very knowledgeable. So I wanted to bring myself up to speed and navigate how to do it correctly. And so when the time came, I was I was looking for houses. I was in a relationship at the time, and I didn't know really where to buy. I was looking down south. Um, I was looking down in South Australia on like the Eyre Peninsula, and I was like, oh, this is amazing because incredible waves and experienced desert life there. And then anyway, I ended up buying a house in Broome. So where I was Fitzroy Crossing, and this was in Broome, and the relationship finished, and I was basically there in a house in Broome, ready to kind of set this thing up to be an investment property and X, Y, and Z. And I quickly realized that I wasn't any happier by having a house than what I was when I was traveling and living this dream. And so I was really started to question why I was actually even why I'd done what I'd done, and how I'd gotten this far. And so it wasn't in the way of over analyzing, but just going, okay, well, I've walked this path that a lot of people walk and that society kind of really channels you into doing. And when I had announced or shared that I bought a house, I mean, I didn't even do like this sold sticker and things like that. So it was quite uneventful actually. But I only really told close friends. I didn't really publicly announce it. And anyway, I realized that even though there is pathways within that in financial investment, that I was actually removing and pulling myself further away from my truth of how I actually want to live my life. And I realized that I was actually creating more imprisonment by these types of choices. And when I say that, this is from a place of self-reflection. Some people find more security by having a house. Some people find more groundedness. Some people find that it is a pathway to their financial freedom, if that's what they're looking for. But for me, it wasn't that.
Did you feel weighted down?
I felt very weighted down. The only major part of the freedom lied within the fact that I could do whatever I wanted to the house because I owned it.
The creative part.
The creative part. And I did. I did a lot of renovations on the place, and I used my carpentry skills and I upgraded it and things like that. But I also realized that I'm now going to work to pay off this house. And what money I had left over had to be allocated, and it had conditioned my life in the opposite of freedom. And so time went on. At this point in time, I was working at the rehab, and I was a clinical case manager, and I was delivering art therapy. And on my lunch breaks, I would go to the hardware store and I would pick up materials and things like that. And then on the weekends, I would work on a project in the house and bits and pieces. Whilst I was doing that, I was continuing my studies at the same time. So every second weekend, I was in class Saturday, Sunday, 8 hours both days. And I was also processing a breakup at the same time. So there was a lot going on. But what eventually came to me was that I always felt uncomfortable when I returned back to Australia from these overseas adventures because I felt like I wasn't walking the normal road and that people were evolving quicker than me, or they were, because of these stabilities and the choices they were making, that they were somehow further along. And I was comparing myself to other people, but only when I was in Australia. And so I felt like I was trying to always play catch up. And I remember before I opened my barbershop, I remember saying to myself, I want to prove that you can spend over a decade traveling the world, but then still come back to a place like Australia, have your own business, buy your own home, things like that. Because I believe that you can buy a house whenever you want, but you don't always have the opportunity to travel. And particularly in your 20s. Like, I'm now 39 years old. If I wanted to, I could easily recreate my 30s in my 40s. But I knew from a very early age that you could never, without embarrassing yourself, to be honest, recreate your 20s in any other decade. It's just not possible.
Health wise as well.
Health wise, resilience, cluelessness, all of these things. And, you're experimenting, right? As you get older, you're hopefully refining. And so that's why I invested all of my resources into traveling, because I knew that I was never going to get that time back. But I did say to myself that I want to prove. And I said to myself, I want to prove it to myself. But in actual fact, I also wanted to prove to other people. I wanted to prove to the naysayers. I wanted to prove to the people who were questioning my decisions and why I wasn't settling down.
Extended family, just.
Exactly. And so what I did is I'd done it all. I had my own business. It was very successful. I created an incredible life for myself within that business. I had then sold that business, challenged myself, learned new skills, had an amazing experience through opportunity by living in the Aboriginal community. I was studied, so I'd educated myself. I then had exposure to the therapeutic space in what would easily be described as one of the hardest places to facilitate and work within that environment. And then I bought the house. And it was quite funny that I bought the house and then the relationship didn't work out. And it was quite funny because when I reflected back, I was like, okay, so now what? Like, now what do I do? Now I've done all this. And I'm like, I've ticked these boxes and I've caught up and I've walked the road that people walk, but this hasn't made me any happier. In fact, it's added more stress. It's added more questioning. I felt more stuck. And the people who were happy with my decisions were the people I didn't really need or want to receive validation from or approval from anyway. When I
don't see them anyways.
You don't care about them. Yeah, you don't care about them. Like, really, in the bigger picture. So I realized one day when I was going to my friend's place that I have finally worked incredibly hard to position myself to be able to work remote, and not only remote, overseas. And I thought to myself, well, why don't I go back overseas? And why don't I take what I know and my practice and my therapy and put it online to a private practice and then continue this work and actually have more availability and bigger access to the world platform. And so the only thing that was really stopping me at that time was my dog, Smokey. And, there was discomfort around that because I never got a dog to then be irresponsible and have somebody else look after it. But there was something really genuine about these reflections. And I spoke to my mum, and she was in the process of actually kind of looking for a dog anyway and things like that, and actually just in very small succession had adopted a dog, and then was willing to, more than willing to, look after Smokey.
Mm.
And I sold my house. I finished up the time in the rehab. I ended up leaving the Kimberley after a couple of years of just an incredibly well-rounded and deep experience, and went back to Melbourne for the summer, caught up with family and friends, and then embarked on the journey to head off overseas and to make a life overseas. And, I talk about Smokey every day.
And for everybody listening, Smokey is living a very good life.
Yes, he's living a very, very good life.
Big sausage.
Yes, but we are in the process of also inviting him into this space. And the only reason why he hasn't come into our lives earlier is because I knew that we weren't going to be in Bali for that extension of time. So I wanted to make sure that all the ducks were in a row and we were in exactly the right place to invite him over. And I know Smokey knows that.
Mm.
He knows. I told him before I left, I said, this is just
temporary.
This is temporary. This is a temporary arrangement. And so it was important for me to actually sit with why I was doing all these things. And that more often than not, walking a path that has never been designed for you will ultimately lead to unhappiness. And trying to prove that you can do something for other people is actually a waste of time.
It's the worst.
It's a complete waste of time. And yes, there's always teachings. Yes, there's learnings and there's wisdom that will come from these experiences. But I honestly believe that the depth of that wisdom is within the self-reflection of knowing that you went against your truth, but that's okay. Mm-hmm. Because when you find your way back to that authentic path that one is being called or destined to live, then it feels even sweeter because it's almost like a homecoming. Mm. It's a return. It's coming back to self and going, yeah, grateful for those experiences. But wow, I kind of went off track there. I was off in the bush. It wasn't for me. I've always felt like I'm in the bush and just bush bashing and creating my own path. But I guess I was on the bitumen, right? No trees around, no nothing, no shade. So it was very, very valuable. And I have always been able to reflect within myself around the fact of whether I'm truly content and happy. And if what's on the other side of discomfort is worth it, then you keep going. But when you know that it's not, what's the point? Like, there is no point. It doesn't make you a better person, more righteous person if you see something through and then prove to yourself that you were never meant to do it in the first place. You don't get a mark or a star or
a golden
star for that. You just waste time in a particular way. And I was able to receive a lot of teachings in that year, particularly in that 6 months, because the choices I had made put me in a position where I couldn't move. I didn't have the freedom. And it was such a blessing because I had to sit with the discomfort. I had to sit with it. Every part of that breakup I sat with. Every part of the discomfort of that house that I bought, because it wasn't in a very nice area, I had to sit with. I had to motivate myself. I had to really focus in on how do I give myself exactly what I need to be able to get through this hard time. I had to be very, very supportive, but quite disciplined with my approach, because it was a little bit of a house of cards, right? Like I had my track and I had to stay on it. So what I mean by that is I had to maintain that I ate very well, very healthy. I got up at 5 o'clock every day and I practiced yoga and I did my meditation and these affirmations. And as I said, I cooked all my own meals. I took meal prep or packed lunches to work. And I really just dialed in on what I needed and what is going to nourish me and sustain me through this time. Because we know impermanence, right? This time will pass. But how do I have the capacity to show up for all of these things? And I was by myself.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting because it was at the end of that year, before, it was 1 week before my birthday, that I got a call. I was helping a friend out doing some carpentry, and I got a call from my sister, and she told me that my father had taken his own life. And I was heartbroken, mainly because of how alone he was. And to put into context, I hadn't spoken to my father in 4 years. And so I didn't know where he was mentally, emotionally. And we had reconciled our relationship, and there was a 2 year period in between that and previous to that 10 years where we hadn't spoken. And so my heart broke for him and his situation and his standard of living within the struggles he had with alcohol and how that was. But I was very fortunate that I was able to hold myself, and that sitting with all the discomfort from that breakup and the decisions I'd made actually prepared me to hearing that news. And I cried, and I openly knew that if somebody was there, that I would let them in and I would let them hold me, which is not how I used to do it. I would heal in silence.
By yourself.
By myself. And even though I was on my own, the following day from when I found out, I spoke to 6 people on the phone. Naturally, organically just happened. And they were all women. And afterwards, I reflected on how beautiful that is, that I am a man who has support systems in his life, and female support systems, female friends, female guidance, as well as male. And I hold space for them as much as they hold space for me. And the rest of that weekend, I continued to reflect on my relationship with my father and the growth that has happened and the different choices that I had made, particularly around alcohol. But I was able to sit with those emotions because I was safe. I was able to hold myself while I cried and really acknowledge everything for what it was. And it was deeply moving. Not only for the fact of the circumstances, but the witnessing of change
Within yourself.
within myself. And particularly being a male and not being afraid of those emotions is a hard thing to describe, because they're very confronting and easy to run from, easy to avoid. But when you become a sovereign of those emotions, they can teach you a lot about how far you've come and your capacity to love and that capacity extends not only to others but
Yourself.
yourself. And that was, I was only then weeks away from leaving Kimberley. And I remember before I left, I asked the universe and the spirits of those lands to show me what needs to be shown. So I was very grateful. That's exactly what happened.
Beautiful.